I never imagined that the worst moment of my life would happen in my own home. For many years, I believed I had a normal marriage. It was not perfect, but it was stable. My husband and I had been legally married for 8 years. We shared the same house, the same bed, and the same responsibilities. At least, that was what I believed. My husband was a confident man. He was tall, handsome, and very good at talking to people. When we first met, I was deeply attracted to his charm. He knew exactly how to make a woman feel special. In the beginning, he treated me like the most important person in the world. He brought me flowers. He called me every night before sleeping. He promised that he would always protect me and never hurt me. At that time, I believed every word. After we got married, our life started to change slowly. It didn't happen suddenly. It was like a small crack in a wall that slowly became bigger and bigger. At first, he simply became busy. He said his job required more time and more social activities. He started coming home later than usual. Sometimes he smelled like alcohol. Sometimes he looked tired and annoyed. Whenever I asked him about it, he would say the same thing. "Don't worry too much. I'm just working hard for our future." So I tried to understand him. I told myself that marriage required patience. Months passed, then years passed. Our conversations became shorter. Our dinners together became rare. Sometimes we lived in the same house for days without really talking, but I still believed that he loved me. Looking back now, I realize that I ignored many warning signs. For example, he started protecting his phone like it was a secret treasure. Before, he used to leave his phone on the table, but later, he carried it everywhere, even when he went to the bathroom. One night, while he was taking a shower, I saw his phone vibrating on the bed. The screen lit up. I didn't plan to check it, but something inside me felt uneasy. The message on the screen was short. "Are you coming tonight?" My heart suddenly started beating very fast. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't recognize the number. When he came out of the shower, I asked him calmly, "Who texted you?" He looked at me for a second, then quickly grabbed his phone. "Just a colleague," he said casually. But something in his voice felt strange. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was full of questions. But the next morning, everything returned to normal again. He went to work. I went to work. Life continued, as if nothing had happened. I told myself that maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being insecure. Unfortunately, the truth was much worse. A few weeks later, something happened that I will never forget. It was a Friday evening. I finished work earlier than usual, so I decided to go home and cook dinner. I wanted to surprise my husband. We hadn't spent a peaceful evening together for a long time. When I arrived at the apartment building, I noticed that the lights in our living room were already on. That was strange. My husband had told me he would be working late that night. At first, I thought maybe he came home early, but as I walked closer to the door, I heard something that made my body freeze. Laughter. A woman's laughter. It was soft and playful. For a moment, I stood there silently in the hallway, holding my keys. My mind tried to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe a neighbor had come to visit. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. My hands were trembling when I opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of perfume filled the air. It was not my perfume. My heart dropped. I slowly walked toward the living room, and then I saw them. My husband was sitting on the couch. Next to him was a young woman I had never seen before. She was wearing a short dress and leaning very close to him. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. They both turned their heads and looked at me. The woman seemed surprised, but my husband didn't look embarrassed at all. Instead, he sighed like I had interrupted something important. "What are you doing home so early?" he asked. His calm reaction shocked me even more than the situation itself. I stared at him, unable to speak. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe properly. The woman slowly stood up and looked at me with curiosity. "Is this your wife?" she asked him. My husband nodded casually. "Yes." That single word felt like a knife cutting through my heart. I expected him to panic. I expected him to apologize. I expected him to feel ashamed. But none of those things happened. Instead, he simply looked at me and said something that completely destroyed my world. "If you're tired, you can go to the bedroom." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. Then the woman laughed quietly, and suddenly the terrible truth became clear. He wasn't even trying to hide his betrayal anymore. He wasn't afraid of me seeing them. He wasn't afraid of hurting me. In that moment, I realized something very painful. The man I trusted, the man I married, no longer cared about my feelings at all. And that night was only the beginning of a nightmare that would completely change my life. But I still didn't know how much worse things were about to become. For several seconds after my husband spoke, I couldn't move. "If you're tired, you can go to the bedroom." His voice was calm, almost bored, as if I had just come home from work and interrupted a normal evening. But nothing about that moment was normal. The woman standing beside him looked at me with curiosity, like I was a stranger who had accidentally walked into the wrong apartment. My heart was beating so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. I finally found my voice. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. My husband leaned back on the couch, like the situation was not serious at all. "A friend," he replied. The woman smiled slightly, almost proudly. I stared at them both, trying to understand what was happening. A friend? Friends did not sit that close together. Friends did not look at each other with those kinds of eyes. My hands were shaking. "This is our house," I said slowly. "You brought her here?" My husband looked irritated now, like I was being unreasonable. "Why are you making a big deal out of it?" he said. "You're acting like a child." Those words hit me like a slap. A child? I was his wife. I was the woman who had lived with him for 8 years. I was the woman who cooked for him, cleaned for him, supported him through his difficult times. And now he was treating me like I was the problem. The woman glanced between us, clearly enjoying the attention. "You didn't tell me she would be this dramatic," she said to him softly. My husband laughed. That laugh was the moment something inside my chest broke. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation. Pure humiliation. I walked a few steps closer, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please leave," I said to the woman. She raised her eyebrows. "I'm not talking to you," she replied calmly. Then she turned to my husband. "Do you want me to leave?" For a moment, the room was silent. I looked at my husband with desperate hope. This was his chance to fix everything. He could apologize. He could tell her to go. He could choose his marriage. Instead, he looked at her and shrugged. "Stay if you want," he said. Those 4 words felt heavier than anything I had ever heard. I could feel tears building in my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of them. Not yet. The woman sat back down on the couch next to him, and then she did something that made my stomach twist. She put her hand on his arm, right in front of me, slowly, intentionally, like she wanted me to see it. My husband didn't move her hand away. Instead, he looked at me and sighed. "You're still standing here," he said. I felt like the air had disappeared from the room. "Are you serious?" I whispered. He rolled his eyes. "Look," he said, "you already know how things are between us." Between us? I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" I asked. He stood up from the couch, clearly annoyed. "Our marriage hasn't been good for a long time," he said. "You know that." I shook my head slowly. "That doesn't mean you bring another woman into our house," I said. The woman on the couch laughed again, this time louder. "You're so naive," she said. I looked at her, shocked by her cruelty. But my husband didn't defend me, not even once. Instead, he walked past me and poured himself a drink. The sound of the glass hitting the table felt strangely loud in the quiet room. "You're overreacting," he said while drinking. Overreacting. The word echoed in my head. Overreacting. Was I really overreacting? I was watching my own husband flirt with another woman in our living room. My hands started trembling again. I suddenly felt extremely weak. I sat down in a chair across from them because my legs could barely hold me anymore. The woman leaned closer to my husband and whispered something into his ear. He smiled. Seeing that smile felt like someone was slowly tearing my heart apart. Tears finally slipped down my cheeks. I tried to wipe them away quickly, but more kept coming. I hated crying in front of them, but I couldn't stop. My husband noticed my tears and looked irritated again. "Oh my God," he said. "Now you're crying?" His voice was full of impatience, not concern, not guilt, just impatience. "You're embarrassing yourself," he continued. That sentence hurt more than anything else. Embarrassing myself, as if I was the one who had done something shameful. The woman looked at me with a strange smile. "You should calm down," she said. Calm down. I felt like screaming, but no sound came out. Instead, I just sat there, crying silently, while the two of them continued talking like I was invisible. Time seemed to move very slowly. Every second felt like a heavy stone pressing on my chest. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. The man I loved no longer respected me, not as a wife, not even as a human being. And the worst part was, I was forced to sit there and watch everything happen right in front of my eyes. That night felt endless, but the humiliation I experienced in that living room was only the beginning of the darkest chapter of my life. Because what happened next would push my heart to the very edge. I don't remember how long I sat there that night. Time felt strange, like it had slowed down just to make my suffering last longer. My tears had already dried, but my chest still felt heavy and empty at the same time. Across the room, my husband and that woman continued talking and laughing quietly. They behaved like I didn't exist, like I was just a piece of furniture in the house. At one point, the woman stood up and walked toward the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator as if it were her own home. That was the moment I finally stood up. My legs were shaking again, but I forced myself to walk forward. "Enough," I said. My voice sounded weak, but it was the first time that night that I spoke with determination. They both looked at me. The woman raised an eyebrow. My husband sighed heavily, like he was tired of dealing with me. "What now?" he asked. I looked straight into his eyes. For years, those eyes had been familiar and comforting to me. Now they looked cold and distant. "You need to leave," I said to the woman. This time, my voice was stronger. She laughed softly. "You already asked that," she replied. "I'm not talking to you," I said firmly. Then I turned to my husband. "You need to ask her to leave." For a moment, the room was completely silent. My husband stared at me like he was deciding whether I was worth his time. Finally, he spoke. "Why are you making this so dramatic?" he said. Those words felt like a final confirmation of something I had slowly been realizing. He truly didn't care. Not about my feelings. Not about our marriage. Not about the pain he was causing. The woman looked amused by the tension. "Maybe I should go," she said casually. But her tone suggested she wasn't serious. She was enjoying the situation. My husband shrugged again. "Do whatever you want," he told her. Something inside me cracked again, but this time it felt different. The pain was still there, but now there was something else growing inside me. Clarity. For years, I had tried to protect this marriage. I had believed that love could fix everything. I had believed that patience and sacrifice would eventually bring us back together. But in that moment, standing in my own living room while my husband treated me like a stranger, I finally understood the truth. I was the only one trying to save this relationship, and a marriage cannot survive when only one person cares. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing became calmer. My husband noticed the change in my face. "What?" he asked suspiciously. I looked at both of them quietly. "You can stay," I said. They both looked surprised. The woman smiled again. "I knew you would calm down," she said. But she didn't understand. Neither of them understood. Because when I said those words, I had already made a decision. I turned around and walked toward the bedroom. Behind me, I could hear them whispering. Maybe they thought I had finally accepted everything. Maybe they thought they had won. But they were wrong. Inside the bedroom, I closed the door slowly. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to cry again. Not loud crying, not desperate crying, just quiet tears falling down my face. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. This room had once felt safe. It had once been the place where we shared dreams about our future. Now it felt empty, like a stage where a story had already ended. After a few minutes, I stood up and opened my closet. I took out a suitcase. At first, my hands hesitated. Leaving meant accepting that my marriage was truly over. But staying meant something worse. Staying meant accepting humiliation. It meant accepting that I deserved to be treated like nothing. And I finally understood something important. No one deserves that, not me, not anyone. So I began packing slowly. Clothes, important documents, a few personal items. Outside the bedroom, I could still hear laughter. That laughter used to break my heart. Now it only confirmed my decision. About 30 minutes later, I finished packing. I opened the bedroom door and walked back into the living room. They were sitting closer together now. The woman's head was resting on his shoulder. My husband looked surprised when he saw the suitcase. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice sounded confused. Maybe he thought I was just being dramatic again. I looked at him calmly. "I'm leaving," I said. The woman straightened up immediately. My husband frowned. "You're serious?" he asked. "Yes." He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he laughed. "You'll come back," he said confidently. You always do. For a moment, those words almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But then, I remembered everything that had happened that night. The humiliation, the cruelty, the complete lack of respect. And suddenly, I felt stronger than I had felt in years. No, I said quietly. This time I won't. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Neither of them tried to stop me. As I opened the door, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pain, relief, fear, but also something new. Freedom. Before stepping outside, I turned around one last time. My husband was still sitting on the couch, looking at me with disbelief. For years, I had stayed because I loved him. But that night, I finally chose something else. I chose myself. And even though my heart was still broken, I knew that walking away was the only way I could begin to heal. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines beside my bed. When I slowly opened my eyes, everything looked blurry and distant. My body felt weak, and even breathing seemed difficult. For a moment, I didn't understand where I was or why I was there. Then the memories began to return. They came slowly at first, like shadows creeping into my mind. The betrayal, the humiliation, the moment I was forced to watch my own husband destroy our marriage without a single ounce of shame. A tear rolled down the side of my face. I remembered how broken I felt that day. I remembered how the pain inside my chest felt unbearable, like my heart was being crushed. In that moment, I truly believed my life had already ended. That was why I had made the decision to give up. But somehow, I was still alive. I stared at the white ceiling above me for a long time. Nurses walked in and out of the room, checking the machines and adjusting the IV connected to my arm. Their voices were quiet and professional. No one visited me. Not him. Not the woman who helped destroy my marriage. No one came to ask how I was. No one came to apologize. At first, the loneliness felt painful. But the longer I lay there, the more something inside me began to change. I realized a simple but harsh truth. The only person who could rebuild my life was me. After I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to a small rented room. It was far away from the place where I used to live with my husband. I didn't want to see those streets again. I didn't want to remember the life that had been shattered. The room was tiny. There was only a narrow bed, a small table, and a window that faced a noisy street. At night, the sounds of cars and people outside filled the air. But it didn't matter. It was the first place that truly belonged to me. The first few weeks were incredibly difficult. Sometimes I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, my heart beating fast, as the memories replayed in my mind. The image of that day refused to disappear. I would sit quietly on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark room while tears ran down my face. But every morning, I forced myself to stand up, even when I felt exhausted, even when my chest still hurt. I told myself the same sentence every day: I will not let them destroy my life. At first, my goal was simple. I just needed to survive. I found a small job as an assistant in a company office. The salary was low and the work was repetitive. I spent hours organizing documents, answering emails, and delivering paperwork between departments. It wasn't the kind of job people dreamed about. But I didn't complain. Every paycheck meant another month of rent. Every working day meant I was moving forward instead of staying trapped in the past. People at the office sometimes looked at me with curiosity. I knew they could see the sadness in my eyes. Some of them whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. "She always looks tired." "I heard she used to be married." "Something bad must have happened." At first, those whispers made me uncomfortable, but after a while, I stopped caring. The pain I had already experienced was far worse than gossip. As the months passed, something surprising began to happen. The woman who used to cry every night slowly began to disappear. In her place, someone stronger was growing. After work, instead of going straight home to sleep, I began spending time learning new skills. I watched online courses about business, marketing, and financial management. I read articles about how companies grew and how successful entrepreneurs built their ideas from nothing. Sometimes I studied until midnight, sometimes even later. The room that once felt empty slowly filled with notebooks, plans, and ideas. My weekends were no longer about resting. They became days for planning and learning. While other people spent their free time relaxing, I spent mine building a future. I wasn't doing it for revenge, at least not anymore. I was doing it because I finally understood something important. No one was coming to rescue me. If I wanted a better life, I had to create it myself. About a year later, an opportunity appeared at the company where I worked. The owner wanted someone to help manage their small online store. At that time, their online sales were weak, and no one really understood how to improve them. The position didn't offer much extra pay, and most people didn't want the responsibility. But I volunteered. The owner seemed surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. I simply nodded. That small opportunity became a turning point. Everything I had been studying during the past year suddenly became useful. I began improving the product descriptions, redesigning the online store layout, and studying customer behavior. I spent hours analyzing what people wanted and how they made purchasing decisions. Sometimes I stayed in the office long after everyone else had gone home. Within 6 months, something incredible happened. Sales doubled. Then they kept growing. Customers started leaving positive reviews. The company began receiving more orders than before. One afternoon, the owner called me into his office. He looked at the sales reports in disbelief. "I didn't expect this kind of improvement," he said slowly. I just smiled politely, but inside my heart, something warm appeared. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. Not because someone praised me, but because I knew how hard I had worked to rebuild my life. 2 years after leaving the hospital, I made a decision that surprised everyone around me. I quit my job. My coworkers thought I was crazy. Some of them tried to convince me to stay. "You have stability here," one colleague told me. "Why risk everything?" But they didn't know what I had been planning for months. While managing the company's online store, I had been carefully studying the market. I had learned what customers wanted and what products were in demand. I believed I could build something of my own. So I started a small business. At first, it was just me, a laptop, and a tiny rented workspace. The beginning was terrifying. There were days when no customers placed any orders. Bills continued to arrive, and the fear of failure sometimes kept me awake at night. But I refused to stop. I had already survived the worst moment of my life. Business challenges no longer scared me. Slowly, customers began to appear. One order, then another, then many more. The business grew little by little. People appreciated the quality of my products and the way I treated them with honesty and respect. Months turned into years. 3 years passed. The small workspace expanded into a real office. Employees joined my team. My company continued to grow, and people in the industry began to recognize my name. But the most important change was inside me. The woman who once believed her life had ended was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, calmer, and finally at peace. One afternoon, as I was walking down the street after leaving my office, I noticed a man searching through a trash container for food. His clothes were dirty, and his body looked thin and exhausted. At first, I didn't pay much attention, until he lifted his head, and I saw his face. It was my former husband. For a moment, neither of us moved. His eyes widened as he recognized me. Shock filled his expression, followed by embarrassment. He looked like he wanted to say something, but I simply smiled calmly. Then I continued walking forward, leaving the past behind forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share it with someone who loves emotional English stories. We upload a new cozy English story every day, so subscribe now and turn on the notification bell to never miss a story. Which part of this story moved you the most? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Keep practicing your English with our daily stories and see how fast your listening and vocabulary improve.